do believe we're live. I think we are. I know there are already people on. We've been checking to see people have come in early. Um, Today is Friday, the 10th of November, and of course tomorrow is the official day of remembrance. I think in America you call it Veterans Day. In England, we call it simply Remembrance Day because it's a day of remembering all of our armed forces in the war, in both wars, actually, the First World War and the Second World War. Um, but we also, then there have been other wars, and so we always take this time, this particular day, November 11th, is that day of remembering. And I guess we could put it remembering our heroes, many who died on the battlefield, many like my father who have passed, but um, I always think of uh, November 11th. When I think of November 11th, I always think of my father, who was actually um, an in the army for all of his life. Anyway, before we do that, I want to say hello to everybody. Hi to Chris, and especially I want to say hello to Grey Eagle, who is standing by my side. Oh, look at that. And I've got my daddy by my side, and my brother's here. And well. And I've got Mary Lou here with me in the room, and she's got her daddy standing by her side as well. Other side, that side. so, so we got a house full here. So we've got right. So we got a few people popping in here. So that's nice for me. And I'm sure that if all of you stay really, really quiet, and that maybe especially tomorrow, you might see or sense or be aware of your loved ones in the spirit world, particularly those who fought, those who gave up their lives, those who gave up so much, not just those who died, but those who participated in making sure that we are free and that we're not under any kind of dictatorship. I mean, when you think about it, that's a huge thing that they did. And such a great loss of life and such a great loss of limbs, should I say, such a great loss of people's sanity, and on it goes. When you think of soldiers, and now, of course, when my father was in the army, we did not have women in the armies, or the armed forces, should I say. But now, of course, we have many women who serve and help to keep our sanity safe, and they help to keep our freedom. So it's not just remembering those who have gone before us, those who died through the war, and those who fought in the war. It's also, I like to think, it's a remembrance of those who are still fighting, still defending us, and helping to keep us safe. All right. So, do we have anybody there, Chris? Is there anybody there?
Yeah, there are a lot of people in the chat room, Rosemary.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take a couple of whatever you've got there. But then I promised that I would tell you all a story, and I have two stories about my dad that I thought I'd share with you, and then you all can share with me. So go ahead.
All right, Paul is on saying her loved one served in CBI in World War II.
Oh, I don't know what that is, CBI.
Mark is saying, thank you for this. I'm remembering an amazing dad who served in World War II.
And what's his name?
we didn't get that yet.
Yeah, well, come on, because I'd like to sort of say their names and give them a shout out. That would be nice, right? Too. Okay, well, all right. Let me then start my story. So first of all, I have to tell you about my daddy, who was an army man for all of his life. he joined up, as they say, when he was 13 years old. Now, in England, I think the earliest in those days, years ago, the earliest you could join up, you had to be 14 and a half years old. I mean, still children, right? But my dad joined up when he was 13 and lied about his age. By the time they found out that he lied about his age, he was practically 14 and a half. Because, you know, when you're training, they move you here, they move you there. Nobody's really checking on the, you know, on the privates of the world, because they're not interested. They sign you up and off you go. So it took about a year and a half before they actually discovered that he'd joined the army, and he was way underage, by which time he was of age. And then they, of course, allowed him to stay in. And he stayed in the army until he married my mother, and he had a couple of kids. I'm not quite sure what it is, but pretty soon, you know, it was, he might have been out of the army for a year or two, and then he went right back in again, and that was it for him. So he was a career soldier, very much so, very much a career soldier. And he was tough. I mean, he was seriously tough. And we all grew up in a household where, well, we were, I won't speak for my brothers and sisters because they have their own stories, but certainly I was terrified of my mother, and I was terrified of my father. And, you know, you put one foot wrong, or you say one word, and you don't even know what you've done or what you said that's wrong, but a hand would come out, or you'd get backhanded or what have you. And during the course of my growing up, until I got to be, well, let me see. Well, so my sisters would tell you, and because I'm surprised that they tell me, but they have said to me that, you know how there's always one kid, if you've got, there's a few kids in the family, there's always one that gets it the worst. And my sister tell me, and I used to think it was me, thinking poor me. But actually my sisters have often verbalized that I was the one who got it. And they loved that because I guess I was the scapegoat. My father had a habit, if something was wrong, my mother would always be the instigator of the punishments in my father's ear continually. And his way would be to, he'd say, get all 4 of his girls. My brothers by this time had left home. He'd get the 4 of his girls, and he'd stand us in front of him, and he'd say, okay, you know, someone left a footprint in the garden. And I swear to you that that's a true story. Someone left a footprint in the garden. Who is it? Who knows who it is? Who knows? But my sisters learned very quickly that if nobody said anything and nobody owned up or what have you, well, there was a good chance that they would get away with it, which was usually how it worked. I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me when I'm telling you this story, because that's not the point of this story. I'm just telling you, I'm trying to give you an idea of what it was like growing up in my family. And my father was very stern, very, very strict. So then he would say, you know, somebody left a footprint on the garden, or who was it? And then he would say, right, go up, sit to the top of the stairs. Sit at the top of the stairs, talk amongst yourselves, and the one who did it, own up. So we'd all sit at the top of the stairs. Well, I didn't know. Well, it wasn't me. Well, who knew anyway who it was? It's a footprint in the garden. You might be running around, you might be playing, whatever, anyway. And so it wasn't me, it wasn't me. And they knew there was a very good chance then at some point he'd call us down, right, the one who did it stepped forward, and none of us would step forward. And my sisters knew there was a really good chance. And then I would feel my mother's finger digging in the back between my shoulder blades. Well, we know who did it. And she'd push me forward. And then my father would say, go upstairs, take your pants off, lean over the bed and wait for me to come up. Sometimes he'd come up straight away. Sometimes he'd make you wait 10 minutes. Sometimes he'd make you wait much longer than that. And you'd lay over the bed, bare bum, sticking up. And the last time he ever did that to me, I was 16 years old. And somehow or another, I decided, I was 16 and I was now getting really stubborn, and I decided I wasn't going to cry. And the more I didn't cry, the harder my father hit me. And the more he hit me, the more I didn't cry. I think I bit my mouth till it was bloody, and it hurt. I can tell you it hurt. But luckily that was the last time he did that. But there were other methods of punishment, and when I was again 16 or 17, he beat me up really, really badly. Again, my mother was always in the background. Well, we know who did it. Well, it was she who did it. And my father would be so frustrated with my mother's nagging that I guess he had to take it out on someone. He beat me so badly that it's the only time I remember one of my sisters actually defending me. My oldest sister, who I was actually getting the beating for, because it was her fault, really. She actually jumped on my father's back, screaming and raging, and he just threw her off, and he threw her right across the room. She hit the wall. She was fine, but, and then he just kept beating me. The thing I remember the most about that is that, I was on the bed, arms covered, and looking for someone to help me. And I saw my mother standing in the doorway with my two other sisters, one on either side of her, not lifting a finger, not saying anything, not telling him to stop, nothing. And that is the worst, really, I think, of what happened, because as mothers we want to protect our children, don't we? But anyway, that wasn't happening. So you're probably now all thinking, this is a horrible situation, what a horrible man he was, and so on. But he actually was not. First of all, he was an amazing soldier, I have no doubt about it. He was at Dunkirk, he fought. I'm sure many of you have the same, with your fathers, brothers, whoever. He was a man who did not know how to show the gentle side of him. He'd been brought up since the age of 13, and before then he came from an awful home and a horrible, situation there, and he learned to be tough. But so now I'm going to switch, because I wanted to give you an idea of the way that we grew up. So now what I'm going to tell you sounds weirdly opposite. So I was 6 years old. We were in Germany. My father had been posted to Germany, and my sisters and I shared a bedroom. It was a big bedroom. We each had a bed, each on one wall, and I woke up in the middle of the night. It was really dark, and thunder was crashing and lightning flashing, and it was absolutely going crazy. And I sort of half sat up in bed, and none of my sisters were there. And I started to cry, even though I knew that I could be punished for crying, because, as I've said, my father was tough. And I started to cry because I was all by myself and I was really scared of the thunder and the lightning. And my father came upstairs. My sisters, he says, your sisters are downstairs. They were afraid. He sat down on the bed. He said, but I don't think you're afraid, are you? And I'd never seen this side of my father ever, the gentleness and the caring. And he said, why don't we sit together, and I'm going to tell you how to deal with the storm. And he taught me to count between the thunder and the lightning. And he sat with me and he held my hand, and it's the first time my father ever showed me any gentleness or kindness or ever treated me like a little girl. And it sticks in my memory like you wouldn't believe. And I can still remember that night, and I can still remember him sitting there and counting with me. I don't know how long it took, because at some point I fell asleep counting. But I passed that information on to Samantha when she got scared of thunderstorms, and I talk about it to Reese. It's a memory. We can, all of us, every one of us, we can think of the bad memories. It's easy. We sort of go down memory lane, and the worst of things pops up. Is why I tell you this story, and why I told you how easy it would be for me to focus on the beatings and on the cruelty and on the all that stuff. But in that one moment when I was 6 years old, my father showed me the gentle and the loving side of him. Just put his hand on my shoulder. We've had these conversations. So, and there's only one other time I ever remember sitting on, actually there are two times, sitting on my father's knee. The first was when my hamster died. I'm not going to tell you that story because it's too long, but I remember him sitting me on his knee and gently telling me that my mother had actually trodden on the hamster. It's a horrible story. We don't want to go there. Do not want to go there. But again, he showed me the gentle side of himself, the kind side of himself, which you never saw on a day-to-day level. We never had anything like that at all. The next time, and the only other time that I ever remember sitting on my father's knee or being talked to in a gentle way, in a kind way, my eldest brother, had gone missing. He was in the army. He was a mercenary, and he was in the jungles of Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and he'd gone missing. And in our family, nobody talked. You never said to anybody, nobody, he'd gone missing. Everybody knew he'd gone missing, but you were all left to deal with the situation by yourselves. I couldn't go to my father or my mother or even to my sisters to say, what do you think? Do you think he's okay? Will he be safe? You just had to internalize, because that was the way in my family. And I know that many of you listening to this story are resonating with that, because so many of us didn't have the opportunity or the knowledge or the know-how as to how we could just talk to our parents. So this particular day, I was 16, I think, 15 or 16 years old, and every day worried about my brother, every day thought about him, every day wondering if he's dead or alive. And I'm pretty sure, I know my father was doing the same thing, but I'm pretty sure that we were all doing that same thing, but none of us talking to each other. So I come home from work, and I'm late. I've had to work late, so it's probably about 9 o'clock at night, and I walk through the door, and I go into the living room, and there's an enormous pile of bags, rucksacks, and all sorts of stuff that belongs to my brother. There's a big pile of it sitting in the middle of the living room, and my father is sitting in his armchair, and I take one look at all of this baggage, which tells me that my brother's home. My brother's come home. And I burst into tears. And as I burst into tears, amazingly, my dad holds his arms out to me, and I run to him, and I just sit on his knee, and he holds me and lets me cry, and I keep saying over and over again, I kept praying, and for the first time in my life ever, I heard my father admit that there was a God, because he said, and I've been praying too. And we sat like that for ages. And at some point it occurred to me, nobody else was in the house. Where are they? And I said, so I said to my dad, where's Terry? Where is everybody? He said, oh, they're all down at the pub. But he said, I decided to sit here and wait for you to come home. He didn't want me to be by myself. He, in that way, showed me what a caring and a loving and an understanding man he was. So for all of the beatings and for all of that other stuff, there are these moments in your life when you catch a glimpse of the person someone dares not be. And my father dare not show that side of himself to people because he was brought up to believe that was weakness. And of course it isn't, is it? It's a strength. But so when I think of my life, I think of my father in those moments, in those kind moments where he held me, where he talked me through the thunderstorm, where he held me when, all the bags and all the military stuff was piled up in the middle of the room and everybody else had gone. Nobody else could have cared less about me. But my father cared. He did not want me to come home and be by myself and have to deal with that. So for those reasons, even though life was tough, and even though as a kid it was pretty rough at times, I do consider that my father is my hero, because for all of that other stuff, I glimpsed, actually, more than a glimpse sometimes, of how gentle and loving and caring he could be if only he dared. Okay, that's my story. So, Mary Lou's here. I'm going to ask if you have a story. What's the matter with you?
No, just.
Oh,
No,
she's looking at me a bit odd. So, if you have a story, we'd love to hear it. I'll give you
Well,
a
I don't want
minute.
to take a lot of time, but I wanted to say that my dad was in World
Could
War
Mary
II.
Lou talk a little louder?
Yes, my dad was in, I want to say shout out to him, thank you, because he was in World War II, and he was in the 44th Infantry as military police.
Oh, right. He was a military
So, yes.
policeman. Oh,
Mhm.
good for him.
Mhm.
Right. I'm not. Was he tough?
He was tough, and when you mentioned about the spanking,
Yeah.
he would do the same thing as far as if we did something wrong, me or my brothers, 3 brothers, we would have to go in the bedroom and wait for him with the belt.
Oh,
And
God.
he would come in and it would be either a talking to or we might get a spanking. It would depend on what he felt, was the type of punishment we needed. And it wasn't that often, but he was tough that way, and he had a lot of good advice for someone who never graduated from high school even, but very, very smart man.
Right. Well, I think, as I say, you sort of glimpse these really wonderful things about people, and we can do one of two things. We can focus on the negative of our lives. You've all heard me say this. We can focus on the negatives of our lives, or we can focus on the positives of our lives. And you can never say what makes a person behave the way they behave. My mother, my father was never deliberately cruel, even though, yeah, he beat me up pretty bad a couple of times, but he was never deliberately cruel. My mother, on the other hand, was deliberately manipulative and very cruel, and meant to hurt. And but you can never say and what caused them to be this way, because I'm sure they had stuff going on in their lives as well. But I would, and I know that some of you have heard me say this before, I am always grateful to my parents, because they taught me how not to be. And I think if you can say that, if you have great parents, they teach you how to be. If you don't have such great parents, don't don't let that lead you down that road of also, behaving the way that they did. You make yourself into that person that you always wanted your parents to be. Let them teach you how not to be.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
And I also wanted to say, I didn't mean to stop there.
No, go ahead.
He was a great, great, great father. And he was somebody that a lot of people would go to for advice. Even, as when we were young and as we got older, smart man, a great man, always wanted to make people happy and smile.
Okay. Shout out to John. Shout out. I've actually spoken to a dad many times, but anyway. Okay, right. Does anybody want to shout out? Does anybody want to say anything here? Let's see what we have, Chris, going on.
All right, we started with Gary. He's saying, "Good morning, Rosemary.
Morning, darling.
All the veterans here and on the other side, I have nothing but respect."
I know, and it's amazing, isn't it? I mean, I know, of course, we had in England, we were fighting the war way sooner than we were fighting Hitler, should I say, way sooner than you were here in America. At first, people volunteered, but as soon as the war started, proper, Churchill, Winston Churchill was an amazing man. He got my country through the war. He got us all through the war. But not that I remember this, because I actually wasn't born. I wasn't born at this point, because the war first started in 1939. And but I've heard this on the radio. I've heard recordings of this when Winston Churchill says, very somberly, "We are at war. Great Britain is at war." And as soon as that pronouncement was made, you didn't have a choice. You weren't, it wasn't like you could volunteer. You were conscripted, and that was the end of that. So all of the young men, not in those days the women, but all of the young men, some having just left school, I don't remember what age they had to be, but something like 15 or 16 years old, you could be conscripted into the armed forces. And if you think I'm wrong, by all means, don't feel, correct me. Anybody out there who actually knows the real age, but people were conscripted. You didn't have a choice, but nevertheless, even though they were forced into fighting, they fought. And armies aren't they? It's about team, isn't it? About working together and so on. And I mean, how can we not say thank you, even if it's only this once a year? Remembrance Day in England is November 11th, and we also the closest Sunday to November the 11th is Remembrance Sunday. We all wear poppies and all of that sort of thing. We do not have a Memorial Day, so it's a very different situation for us. But I understand here in America, November 11th, which is tomorrow, is called Veterans Day, I think, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Go for it, Chris.
All right, and the next one's from Maggie. Maggie says, "My grandfathers, dads, and uncles all served. Some of their stories were funny, and some were heartbreaking. One uncle was one of the first Allied soldiers to enter a concentration compound. It affected him his entire life."
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard the awful stories, but how brave of those people to go in and to go in and rescue. I'm sure the majority did not even know what they were going in to face. I always talk about my father, who was at Dunkirk, and if you don't know what Dunkirk is, it was like the last stand. The soldiers were pinned on the beaches and nowhere to go, and not enough ships. And again, we come back to Churchill, who went on the radio. Remember, it's the days before computers, before iPads, before cell phones and all of that, remember. But he talked to everyone on the radio, and he said, every man, every boy, everyone with a boat. And he asked anybody and everyone with a boat, and from all over the country. And some of these boats were teeny little rowboats, and men risked their lives to get to cross the water. And let me tell you, it was rough waters that they had to cross. Some in small rowing boats, some in fishing boats. People came out in their thousands to cross dangerous waters to get the soldiers off of the beaches. And my father was one of those soldiers who was rescued off of the beaches. Right, keep going, Chris.
Judith says, yesterday I had mentioned my mother and father both being in the Army during World War II, Ruth and Grady. My brother Richard went through Vietnam. I admire them all and all who fought over the years.
Well, I mean, isn't it amazing? You know, and of course, in this country, you did have Vietnam, and even now, in this day and age, there are countries at war, and we all get so concerned about that, as we should. But I often say this is something that's been going on, you know, for years and years and years. And I think about back to Richard III in whatever year that was, and during the Christian wars. And of course, that was when England was busy taking over every other country. We did steal a lot of things. There's nothing to do with me, I'm just saying. But there have always been wars. We've always, you know, people have always fought wars. I know that we had hoped after World War II, that it was so tragic and we lost so many lives, it would be the war to end all wars. And then all of a sudden we have Hitler, and now it's the Second World War, and now this is the war to end all wars. And unfortunately, although, you know, thank God we have not had another world war, there are still wars being fought and still people risking you know, a third world war for power, for greed, to have things their way, because, you know, because this is what they want. And it's such a shame, but I think it's the way of the world. We hate it, but it is the way of the world. But what we can do is we can honor all of those. I thank my brother who's standing next to me, my daddy. I thank my brother who's still with us, Malcolm. He's great. And of course, I've got Mary Lou's dad standing here, so I've got to say thank you to him too. And all of those, I mean, you know, my father had several brothers who all went to war. There are, you know, there are so many people that we have to thank for our freedom. And I think even though there are a lot of people who say, oh, that's in the past and we should forget that and so on, I don't think we should. I think we need a reminder. We need reminders of the fact that we have freedom and that we shouldn't squander it. And we should, you know, look to all the positives in life and appreciate the life that we have. I was at therapy yesterday. I'm going off the subject a bit. I was at therapy yesterday, and it hurts. I'm not going to lie. It hurts. But anyway, there was a lady who came in, and my therapist said hello to her. She sat down, and so on, and so he said she's very upbeat and very chirpy. My therapist is a nice guy, and so he says to this lady, so, you know, how has your week been? Have you had a good week? And she sits there, she's slumped in the chair. She's probably roughly around the same age as I am. And she says, well, well, I live a very dull life. And I so wanted to say something. I so wanted to, I don't know, inspire her or kick her or something. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Well, I live a very dull life. And it was so sad and frustrating at the same time. All right, that's me. I'm done. Chris, keep going. Well, really, you know, we're all struggling. I'm there with my hand and it hurts like heck, and I'm laughing and trying to make it better. And you just want to sometimes grab hold of people and give them a good shaking. Life is precious. It's easy to get depressed. I'm not saying that, I mean, I understand how people get depressed. It's easy to go down that route, but find joy somewhere or another. Find joy, no matter how hard it is. Just find some joy. Sorry, go ahead. I'm done. Right.
That reminds me of a story my dad, who also served in World War II, said about having their line of tanks going along, and then all of a sudden they came under fire and they all had to jump out of their vehicles, and the only place to hide was the ditches on the side of the road. But unfortunately, it was at a time where it was between snow and melt, and so the ditches were cold,
Or
cold, cold
flush.
water. But the only way to stay alive was to be in the ditches. And for hours upon hours, they had to stay in the ditches while the fire was going back and forth. So when you're talking about, I had a dull life, and you think about
I,
everything these
I,
veterans
I know
suffered.
it's so, so sad. So, so sad. All right.
Yeah.
Let's,
So the next one is from Caroline.
hi, Carolyn.
My uncle Don died of his wounds August 21st, 1944, at the age of 21. He
Oh,
was a
my.
POW. Does he know that I think of him often and have cried for him? He's buried in the Canadian War Cemetery, Calais, France. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I know where that is, and I've been there. Um, I'm asking Grey Eagle actually because I think it's important because um, you're telling this story and it's a horrible story. Um, but I want to say, I suppose, I think when we cry for our loved ones, we miss them and we cry for them and we cry for what they went through. Um, be, just be aware that we are given these trials and these tribulations. We come to this earth to learn and to grow. And first of all, I'm told, yes, he's with you, and yes, he knows how much you think about him. But the message here I'm getting is, don't cry for me. Don't cry for me, because pain and suffering teaches us something. If we allow it to, it teaches us something. And I think that this lovely man, and I understand why you cry for him, but this lovely man is fine and well and often visits. Okay, Chris, go on.
Mark said, my dad, Robert E., served in the Navy and was a medic who was involved in the aftermath of the war. The horror he saw plagued him.
Yeah, that's got to be really tough. When you say Robert E., I wanted to say Lee at the end of it, Robert Lee. But a shout out to him and all of those who did. I mean, remarkable things. You know, during these times, we see things that you know live with us, give us nightmares. I mean, how these men and women survived doing what they were doing is absolutely beyond me. But then again, they're such gifts to us and such miracles, our heroes. Okay.
Maggie says, my dad told a story of how there was a competition to clean their barracks. Dad was on the second floor. He convinced the other soldiers to use a hose to the walls and floors, unknowingly flooding the floor. But he said they won the competition.
Well, that was good. Okay, keep going.
Teresa says, my Uncle Joe served in the Navy during World War II and Korea. Dad, Al, I think could be a typo there, served in the Army during Korea. Joe's cousin Joe served in Vietnam in the Army. Uncle Mike served in the Air Force. I served in the Coast Guard.
Well, let's do a shout out to all of your family. Good for them. Good for you. a real nice shout out, and it's good that we're spending this time remembering them. Chris.
Okay. Mark is saying the color blue is absolutely beautiful on you, Rosemary, my favorite color.
It's not my favorite color at all. But anyway, thank you, Mark. Thank you. Keep going, Chris.
Lisa's saying that Carl Dyer, prisoner of war twice, World War II, he
Wow.
suffered alcohol and anger issues, but he overcame them many, many, many years later. He had regrets. He loved Jesus, and after his wife died, he did all he could to talk of the good. He loved my daughter and I and enjoyed our visits. It broke my heart to find out he died in the veterans home a few years ago. My hero for all he had overcome.
Well, let's give a shout out to Carl too. You do all know, don't you, that while you're sitting in your living rooms, the people that you were talking about and the people you're remembering are drawing close to you. Just wanted to say that. Okay, keep going.
Judith says, my mother joined the service after Daddy, hoping she could be with him. Nope, except they did have leave together in Miami. My mother became pregnant with my brother, Hal. She didn't know she was pregnant.
Oh, okay, keep going. We love these stories. I love these stories. I love you sharing them with me.
Let's see. Dee's just wishing everyone to have a blessed Veterans Day. Jeff says, Chamberlain began conscription between the ages of 20 to 24. Then, when war was declared, conscription was mandatory of able bodied men. Younger
Yeah.
men signed up on their own accord, sometimes 16 to 17 years old, who lied about their age out of a sense of responsibility.
Well, well, Jeff, thanks for that. While I'm at it, is this? I'm hoping this is my Jeff,
Yes.
and I've texted Andrea a couple of times, and I'm only can imagine that she's out there having lots and lots of fun. If you could pass that message on, I'm pleased if she's having lots of fun. But anyway, okay, keep going.
Julia says, Dear Rosemary, my mother had to hide in a cellar from 1942 until half of 1944.
Oh
She was
wow,
Jewish. She was alone in the cellar. It marked her all her life. Lots of love to all here.
wow, and that's another kind of hero. I mean, can nobody can imagine having to do that, but she did it. And survival is, you know, the human instinct for survival is so strong in us, isn't it? But she must have had somebody there because somebody must have fed her because you can't be in a cellar by yourself for 2 years and not eat. So I'm looking to the positive in this. I mean, it's such an awful thing that she had to endure, a really terrible thing that she had to endure. But I do hope she had those moments where, you know, someone was taking care of her in some small way or another. Keep going.
Last comment. Thank you, Rosemary and Gray Eagle. I honor you and all those who fought in the world wars. From
Wow.
Caroline.
Thank you, darling. Thank you. Well, now I'm going to tell you one more story, and then I don't know what the time is, but what time is it actually?
Almost 11:15.
Oh, come on. Well, we're almost over anyway then. Right. So I'm going to tell you this story. Now, this is a story, once again, of my dad. Once again, during the war. Once again, remembering things that happened. But my father had an innate faith. He would often say there's no such thing as God, but I think when I told you the story about when my brother was missing and then it came back to us, he went missing because he was stabbed in the back and left in the jungle for dead. Somehow or another, somebody found him, but it took a good more than a year before he was able to get himself back to England. That's now I've just told you another story, but anyway, so my father, even though he would often say there isn't a God, because he saw awful things, awful things. He went all over the world with the army, and even after the war, he saw terrible things happening. So he would say there's no such God, because no God would allow this to happen, except that he did have that innate faith, and when he needed to, he would reach out and, as I said when I was sitting on his knee talking about my brother, and I said, I've prayed and prayed and prayed, and he just held me really tightly, and he said, don't tell anyone, but so I've been praying. So he also had this very strong belief that when it was your time, it was your time. Now, in my family, we didn't talk a lot about a lot of things, but every now and again, my dad and I would talk, and he would tell me stories about the war, and we would just, if it was just the two of us, we would talk about things. And he always believed that when it was your time, it was your time. And he had very good reason to think that. So imagine he's a young man, and he's laughing at me as I'm telling the story, imagining him as a young man. And he was on the march. He was in France, and all the soldiers were marching. Excuse me. And you got somebody at the front, left, right, whatever. My father used to make us march sometimes around the garden, and we'd have to say left, left. I had a good home and I left. I had a good home and I left. My dad used to make us walk around the garden pretending to be soldiers, and we'd have to say that. But anyway, so here he is, and he's in France, and he's, they're marching. And they're marching, the terrain was very, sort of where they were was very narrow. So they were marching single file, and the line of soldiers was a very long one. And so they're marching, and all of a sudden came the order to halt. And in the British Army, certainly when you're told to halt, you halt. I'm sure it is the same in any army, really. So the order came to halt, and my father, immediately every soldier stopped. And as they stopped, the soldier who was in front of my father dropped dead from a bullet. That had somebody said halt 1 second later, that would have been my father. And my father remembers to this day that bullet was not meant for him. It was meant for the guy in front of him. And so, you've all often heard me say, you can't die until it's your time. No matter how much you try, if it's not your time to go, you can't go. Obviously, in that moment, with my father in his army uniform, marching along in France, marching to war, if you like, that one split second, when somebody says halt and you halt, that split second saved his life. So here's the question. I know what the answer is, what I believe. Here is the question. Was that just a coincidence, that bullet not hitting my dad, but hitting the guy in front of him? Was it just a coincidence that my dad had that split second which saved him? Or was it God's plan that the guy in front was being called home and my father had other things to do? I like to think it's the latter. All right, so tomorrow I'm going to think, especially sending out my prayers to all of our heroes, present day heroes, as well as those heroes of our past. I think it's important that we value the heroes. We had a sense of that, didn't we, with COVID, with the doctors and the hospitals and all of the people who rallied for all of that. There are always heroes in our lives. My father is my particular and special hero, and he will hopefully always be by my side. as all of your loved ones will be by your side. And Mary Lou's waving as well, just mentioning that I think you get the last word. So without further adieu, we will be back next Thursday. We might be doing an off the cuff or something. We don't know yet. We're sort of playing it a lot by ear right now. But until I see you next time, please, everyone, have a very, very blessed rest of the week. Have a very blessed rest of the weekend. Be proud not only of your heroes, but there are so many times when we are our own hero. We climb over things, we get through things, we deal with things. I know that I'm my grandson's hero. I know that I'm my daughter's hero. So be proud of the fact of those moments when you can be a hero, and be proud of all of those heroes who've gone before us and those who are still working in this present day to be heroes. I will hopefully see you all next Thursday. Until then, bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.